Well, let's get on to the latest property stats. What are the auction clearance rates looking like?
Yeah, they're a little lower again, starting to slide into the Christmas period. 63.7% was the clearance rate nationally. This time last year it was 66.9, so it's only mildly down. Sydney has been trending downwards. That hit the 70.6%. Melbourne hit 63%. So you've got Canberra and Adelaide sitting in the 50s and 60s. They're not doing too bad. But overall, 63.7% is probably where it should be and where I'd like to see it for quite some time to come.
Sounds good. Now, Tom was obviously talking about the changing scene at auctions. Are we seeing more properties coming on now?
We have been, all the way through. Up until this week, we had a negative 0.28% over the week before, so slightly down, and again expected for Christmas. I was looking at the New Zealand stats as well, and there are only a couple of areas in New Zealand, Gisborne, Wellington, Canterbury, those areas that have had a pretty good run for November, but most of all, across the board, it's slightly down.
Right, okay. And what's happening with the rents at the moment?
A little bit of a spike, not much of a spike, but Sydney climbed. I'm going to change the chart for next year to do week over week to see how that looks rather than this time over 2 years ago. But 13.02% is where it hits for Sydney after 24 months of trading from zero to there. 8.7% in Melbourne and 19.53% in Perth, and that's given us a pretty close to a final average for the year as we come up to the end of it of 13.75%.
Wonderful. And finally, the vacancy rate.
Sydney's fantastic, 1.57% in Sydney and 3.47% in Melbourne. And Perth, 6.85%, so 3.96% as an average. Again, just sat between 3 and 4 pretty much for a very long time, Chris.
Now, I was speaking to a client earlier on today and they were worrying about vacancy. It's one of the classic things that people worry about when investing in property. What am I going to do without a tenant? If you generally buy well, you get a good property manager, you maintain your property well, will you generally always rent a property out?
Well, we talk to landlords about rent reviews on a regular basis, and sometimes those rent reviews doesn't necessarily mean upwards. And a lot of people mistake that. Sometimes you've got to put your rent down to keep a good tenant. And if you've got a good tenant that's been paying often, some of the things that the landlords can do to protect themselves, particularly if it's a residential dwelling with a piece of land, is to even offer a mowing service in there as part of it. It's amazing the little things you can do to keep people in your property that are good people. So I would be nervous about it all the time, about having no tenant. So I'll do whatever I could to make sure that that tenant is far more comfortable than the tenant next door in somebody else's property.
Now, a classic question I always get, or comment I get from people that manage their own properties, they say, yeah, I don't give it to a property manager because I've got a really good tenant and they pay their rent on time. And my reply is, well, that's their job. Yeah. A tenant should be paying the rent on time and you should have queues of tenants that want to do that. Is it true that most owner managers would actually under-rent their property because they've got no idea necessarily what they're doing because they're not doing it professionally?
It's very hard if you're not in there on a daily basis to keep up to speed with anything. If you and I stepped out of the property industry just for 3 months and decided we'd just do something else, not even look at anything to do with property, it's amazing how much you miss in that very, very short space of time, and I think that's a big danger zone. You only need one issue to go wrong with the tenant and you are in all sorts of strife if you don't understand the legislation. We're in enough strife as it is understanding legislation. So,
because, I mean, certainly the legislation is all in the tenant's favour as well. So if you do the wrong thing as a landlord, then the Office of Fair Trading will come down on you.
You can absolutely do the wrong thing and the tenant can still win.
Yeah. So, good to see you as always, Charles. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us at home as well. We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Chris Gray. Good night.
The information featured in this program is general in nature.